We're going to go ahead and start the planning commission for Atherton of the May 23rd meeting. So I'll go ahead and call us to order and now have a roll call, please.
Chair Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Tonelli.
Here.
Commissioner Sokolow. Here. Commissioner Lamb is excused. Commissioner Lerner. Here.
All right, the next item on the agenda is for public comments for items that aren't on the agenda. Sometimes people like to come forward and they give us things that we either look into later on or inform us about something or give us updates on what a fantastic job we're doing. So I'll go ahead and I like to set this up properly. All right, so I'll go ahead and open the public session for anything that's not on the agenda. Public hearing. And with that, I don't see anybody rushing towards the podium, so I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on item 2. And we'll go ahead and go to the approval of the minutes from the April 25th Planning Commission meeting. Anything there that needs to be updated? I didn't see anything specific. It was what I would call pithy. I've been waiting since 8th grade to use that word. All right.
I was not present at the meeting. The only thing I noticed was Commissioner Lamb wasn't at the meeting yet either.
Right.
But yet he motioned for the approval of the minutes.
Yeah, it's probably Lane Lerner. Yeah. It was, yeah.
That was the only thing I noticed.
I wouldn't have done that. Yeah. It was, no, he came later, but no, he was on the last meeting. Yeah.
We could re-look at the video,
look at the video,
update the motion accordingly if necessary.
All right, we'll update it.
Or
Yeah, he doesn't show up he doesn't show up on any of the other votes after that. So he just came for the minute approval. All right. Yeah, I don't think it would have been me, but we'll look at the video.
Yeah, check it out.
So we can have a motion. We can have a motion for those who are here with that amended later on to reflect who really made the motion. Good catch, by the way.
We approve the minutes of the April 25th Planning Commission meeting with the adjustment as noted.
All right, moved and
Second.
seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Abstain.
One abstain. All right, very good. And the next item is consent item. If you don't normally get on the Planning Commission, but it's a general plan consistency determination for the capital improvement program for fiscal years 2018 through 20. So we'll start with a staff overview of this, and then we'll take it from there. All right. Do I have anything that?
I'm happy to jump into it if you'd like with the consent, if you want to take it in one motion.
Yeah,
But we can.
If there are any questions on the way the consent item would normally work is that if there were any questions, we'd pull it from the consent agenda and bring it and have the discussion. And if there are no questions, we just go ahead and approve the consent item. So this is something that we had seen pieces of before, I think. All right, so I need a motion to accept to approve the defining the capital improvement program consistent with the general plan.
Motion to find the capital improvement program consistent with the general plan.
There's a motion, is there a second? Moved and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. All right. And one refused. All right. All right. The next item on the agenda are public hearings, and let me go over how the format for these. What we do with the public hearing items, we'll take them one at a time, and we'll open up the discussion with an overview from staff. And then there'll be any questions that the commission has of staff. And then we'll go ahead and open up the public comment section, and we'll start with the applicant or their representative. Then we'll close the public hearing segment, and we'll come back for discussion with commission and action as appropriate. All right? And that'll be the way we go for every time. So if I go over that again, just because somebody comes in a little bit later and I want them to know the procedure. All right, so with that, then we'll have a special structures permit at 76 Ridgeview Drive, and we'll start with the staff report.
Thank you. So the request before you tonight at 76 Ridgeview Drive is for a special structures permit to allow for a basement garage under a detached accessory building. In this case, the proposed detached accessory building is in the form of a garage itself. The town's basement ordinance does not allow typically for basements under accessory buildings unless certain criteria are met. Specifically, it prohibits garages under accessory buildings. However, the intent of that prohibition was to address the associated required driveways that would be necessary to gain access to a basement garage. That is the vetted spirit and intent of that ordinance, as has been discussed and vetted in prior commission meetings. And really, I think the intent of that prohibition with those subterranean driveway approaches was to address potential light, noise, and other impacts that those long driveways that effectively could form or be used as an outdoor light well could exude. So this particular request of a basement garage does not have the associated driveway to gain access to it. The basement garage would be accessed at grade level through the use of hydraulic parking lifts. So a vehicle would enter the detached accessory building at grade, and then the function of the hydraulic lifts would allow the vehicle to go down into the basement garage. Although the use of a garage is defined as non-habitable space per the Uniform Building Code, the applicant is voluntarily proposing to employ construction details for this basement garage, more typical of habitable space, like a bedroom or other kinds of living area. Specifically, the basement is proposed to have fire sprinklers, as has been confirmed with the applicant's discussion with Menlo Park Fire District. This was an attempt to address some concerns or questions that the commission has had regarding the safety of the use of a basement under another garage and the intent of use of that space. The project arborist has reviewed the plans and determined that the proposed basement garage will not impact any heritage trees on site or onto neighboring properties. No public comment has been received on the proposal. With that, staff is recommending approval of the special structures permit for the conditions as listed in the draft approval certificate. So I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
I have a question. Yeah, this is similar to what I've said before. I see that the Menlo Park Fire District has passed on fire sprinklers. That's very wonderful. But if there's also a stairwell, a single stairwell, which is access to this garage, and if one were in that garage with their mind on other things, and one of the cars burst into flame, and thus the garage interior, the sprinklers would come on, but that person might be blocked from using that single exit. So you sit there with a foolish grin on your face, soaking wet, inhaling smoke. And I wonder if the Menlo Park Fire District has also passed on the concept of having a single entry and exit from that subterranean.
I see that the project applicant is here and could answer perhaps that question, as they did have the direct conversations with the Menlo Park Fire District. However, just in related piece that I'd also like to share, that we do have our building official take a preliminary look at these plans to define that the space would indeed meet the minimum requirements for building code in terms of access and egress and access to the site.
With a single?
With a single,
okay.
yes,
yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Well, that's a decision, but my comment's the same as it's been before.
Any other comments?
Who oversees the proper ventilation? Is that Menlo Fire as well, or is that the town?
That would be the town building department
Okay.
through the permitting process.
I'm sorry?
That was my question too. A couple of old English cars, I can smell them. All right. Anything else? All right.
Just a
Go ahead.
clarification. Is there any prohibition against storage of hazardous materials in a basement like this that is being used to store or park a car? So for instance, motor oils, any other kind of fluid related to autos, or paint, anything of that nature?
The town does have a nuisance ordinance. I I don't believe it specifically has reference to the materials that you just referenced, so I'd have to look into that further for you.
And this is only gonna allow one car downstairs too, right?
Correct,
believe so.
with this particular lift system.
Right.
Mhm.
So can I ask whoever's
Well,
making
let's
it?
open up the public hearing.
Okay.
All right, any other questions of staff? All right, then I'll go ahead and open the public hearing, and by popular demand, the applicant's coming up.
At popular demand. My name is Tim Chappelle. I'm the architect on this project. I came here about a year ago, did the same presentation for it, and you guys have brought up some questions and concerns, and we actually went through fire and building, and they didn't bring any of the same issues up, surprisingly, in that way. We had discussions of communication of, do you put a ladder in there, and even the job we have on Elena, which was approved by permitting, I think the contractor was even discussing putting like an extra escape hatch or something just because, but they're all kind of curious because nobody's seen the contractor, nobody's seen the lift go in, and we're getting shop drawings next week on this, so I've seen it in real person, but it's all new, but it is sprinklered. We are having the exterior exit. We are going, and this is only one car, and really their idea is to store kayaks or whatever down there too. It's not just, not stockpiling cars down there. But all those points were brought up, and we remembered them and brought them up again with the town. But there wasn't any subsequent fire or building department requirements we found.
On the sprinkler system, it's gonna be water.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not really good for an oil or gas fire, so,
It's the same for any garage. It would be.
yeah. Okay, all right. And I wonder why the fire department went along with that.
I guess it's the equivalent of any, garage in essence. The same thing.
Well, anything that would knock down the fire with anything else would be something that would take out and make the oxygen go away to somebody down there, so, of the two things, that's the lesser of evils, yeah.
And the concept, just to be clear about this, is it's a storage and retrieval, not a going down there and hanging out, not working on the car or anything like that. It's
Is there any ventilation out of the door planned?
no, but there has been discussion. So every owner's a little different. We found and how they want to deal with it, and the contractor has their own viewpoints on it. But we're so early in on this project, in this specific, and we haven't figured anything out besides that.
Yeah, well, something to do with the ventilation might be something to look into for sure. I mean, it's one of those things where somebody could, you could be thinking, okay, I'll just bring the motorcycle down there and I'll play around with it a little bit and see if I can get it tuned up and.
Right, that would be irresponsible. You're right.
Right.
That's correct.
And a subsequent owner might use it differently than this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, any other questions of the?
Yeah, so you worked on the project on Elena.
Correct. Yes.
That's a French provincial that we took down, right?
Yeah. What kinds of things did you learn or problems did you solve that you can apply maybe to this project?
Well, we're actually finally getting the shop drawings from the lift manufacturer. It's really the simple procedure. We're finding out just the system, the way it works, the lighting, it's integral lighting with it, the system, the way it works, the units. The ideas with the system is instead of jacking up and going taller with it, which is a problem in storage with cars for people who have means to have multiple cars, not like me, but when you store upwards, you have to have those columns around cars, and you're kind of squeezing in. The idea with this system is it just stores it beneath, and then from a normal everyday operation, you just don't see anything on the upper level. We have yet to get those shop drawings. We're getting them next week, so I'm anxious to see. I've heard they have integral lighting in it, but it's not like you could find them around here very often, so I'm sorry I don't have much more yet on that. I can't wait to see it. You're welcome to come check it out on Elena.
I'd be interested to see it.
Yeah, the other thing too, I don't know exactly what this particular lift has, but I've seen them where there is actually, it's not like a tight seal around the top necessarily, but it depends on the type of unit it is. I mean, it's like it's not like it's flush with the floor. I mean, it's flush with the floor, but it's not sealed on the floor. But maybe that would also
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good
could
question.
also be a ventilation point too, but I don't know what this one would have.
It's definitely, I think, worth investigating. As even the contractors asking, is kind of bouncing questions around on Elena about this, just to kind of get their arms around this and the the possibilities of how do you do anything else besides what's the minimum required for building code?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it your sense that they have a concern, a safety concern, or are they just trying to?
No. The contractors, just like you, just asking questions. They just haven't seen it, and we're all just kind of curious on Elena's kind of our beta testing of it and seeing how this works. And there was discussions. Well, do we? It's people want to see it get in there. How big is it? How much space it's taking? The one I've seen in person was in Los Gatos. It was on a downhill, so they actually had two means of egress out of it. Just coincidentally, it opened up on one side. But it's there's nothing really exciting about it when it's in, but everybody wants to see it.
Maybe you want a sign that downstairs that says, make sure the car upstairs is backed out.
Right, or safety things. There's all kinds of things that come with the system that we're all learning. But it is nice to reduce the massing of these garages to have multiple levels and the building mass above ground. And as Stephanie said, the whole point of this, we think the code was to prevent you from over-excavating all kinds of ramps down into these buildings.
All right, any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anyone else here to speak on this item? Okay, then I'll go ahead and close the public comment and bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate. Stephanie, does the staff, who in the staff, or what group in the staff oversees to make sure everything safety-wise is all taken care of? Is that
That would be
building?
through the plan check process in the building department.
Okay, all right.
Make sure everything's to code.
Yeah.
And that does include review, the need for review and approval by the Menlo Park Fire Department, Public Works Department. I don't know if they would necessarily be involved in drainage and for this particular.
We'll be looking at subsequent to our.
Oh, yes,
Alright.
yes, they need to
Very
develop
good.
the working detailed construction drawings with all the details that are being discussed,
It's
such
often
as.
require a ladder or a fire escape out of upper stories, I'm surprised if they would let this go.
Yeah, like
the same idea.
Like
I'm
I
not
said,
gonna-
preliminarily, the one means of egress out of this basement area was reviewed and given the okay stamp by the building official in terms of what it needs for the type of use that it is.
All right, well, if I were working on a car down there and have a fire extinguisher next to me because I don't want the water to go off, but it's just be me. All right, any further discussion? All right, we're looking for a motion if there is one.
I'll move.
All right,
That the planning commission approve the special structure permit to allow a basement garage under an accessory building at 76 Ridgeview Drive, subject to the conditions contained in the special structure permit certificate.
motion,
Second.
moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Passes unanimously with one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming again.
I'll see you on the building site.
Yeah, we'll have to do a tour of both of them. All right, next item is 5B and the school master plan update for at Menlo School at 50 Valparaiso Avenue. We're going to have the staff overview.
Thank you. So the town has established municipal code policy to request that all private schools within the town prepare a master plan, and that those master plans, once they are adopted, are reviewed and updated annually by the planning commission. Reviewed by the planning commission, updated by the school. The Menlo School Master Plan 2018 is before you tonight for review. The updates in this plan, primarily, if you had the opportunity to read through the detailed plan, the school has renovated its campus, as noted, over the past 17 years in a series of phases. The most recently implemented phases are those of projects are those of phase 3, and those have primarily been completed. Those include the school's athletic center, creative art and design center building, and separation from Menlo College. The master plan update references specific components that have been shown in prior updates. So notably the Performing Arts Center, the school has completed their working drawings for the Performing Arts Center, and that's planned for construction over the course of the next few years. The Carton Athletic Field Complex, that project is currently on hold, pending revisions to the plan to address some current neighborhood and environmental concerns. Parking for both cars, buses, as well as faculty housing and childcare. There is an area on the campus used for car, bus parking, and childcare facility. And this is a continuing evaluation that the school does on how best to serve the needs of their faculty. A site for faculty housing has been dedicated and slated in the adopted master plan. Another component of these master plan updates include a TDM, or Transportation Demand Management Program and Monitoring, and those TDM programs are in their nature designed to reduce the amount of vehicle trips that facilities both create and access. So every year the town requires the master plans, adopted TDM programs to perform an update and see how well they're running. The TDM update performed for Menlo School did conclude that they are indeed meeting their program requirements. They're actually under their maximum allowable amount of vehicle trips as their approval documents would require. So specifically for the parking capacity, the rate is noted to be a little over 86% or less for faculty, staff, and students, and the report concluded that the current rate is slightly less than 74%. So again, they are under that established maximum. The school did hold a community neighborhood meeting in May to review the master plan status. And as reported by the school, it was attended by a few members of the neighborhood, and all of the comments received were positive. So with all of that said, and as detailed in the staff report, staff does find that the master plan update for Menlo School for 2018 does comply with the spirit and intent of the town policies and ordinances related to master plans, and recommends that the commission accept the filing of their 2018 report.
Okay. Any questions of staff? Okay, I'm taking up the notes.
I got it.
Sounds good. Then I'll go ahead and open up the public comment section. Requesting applicant.
Yeah, we're,
Go ahead.
my name's Lauren Arms, I'm the, okay.
Yeah, you're officially here.
I'm officially here.
Yeah, my mom wants to hear about it. She watches on YouTube.
My name is Lauren Arms. I'm the Director of Facilities and Construction. And with me, I've got Alan Lanter, who is our CFO. It is both Alan's and I's first time here, so we're learning about the process.
I haven't seen you before, so I thought you were part of it, but I didn't know for sure. You're
Sure.
both new to the school?
We're both relatively new to the school. We started last July,
Okay.
so we've been there just about 1 year.
You've heard how grueling these comment sections can be. All right.
We're hoping that's not the case.
It's gotten much better.
We are certainly here to answer any questions, provide any information that you may have.
Questions?
I'm always concerned about the traffic flow, especially with how busy things are getting in the general area the past couple of years. And while your numbers are still very good, they're up about 5%. So I'm just curious if you guys have any, or what kinds of ongoing discussions you may have where you consider new or different ideas to try to stay on top of this, because you know it's just going to keep on increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to stay in compliance with the numbers, I'm just wondering if you're proactive at all with your discussions on how to address the increase in traffic issues, even though you're still under the limit.
Yeah, I would think that, there's a number of things, I don't know how much you know, but we run 4 buses daily,
Mm-hmm.
both morning and afternoon, so we've got 4 bus routes. We also run frequent shuttles back and forth to the Menlo Park train station.
Right.
We also offer financial incentives to our students and to our staff to encourage them to use public transportation or other means of transportation. One of the more recent focuses has been, although not related specific to traffic, but we've been promoting electrical vehicle use. We've implemented a number of new parking stations for those types of vehicles. I would say that we don't have anything else planned per se beyond what we're doing at present, but we do watch the numbers very closely. And if we feel like we're inching toward any thresholds, we'll be very aggressive about taking action to encourage our people to not drive.
Why do you think it bumped up this year? I mean, it's been incrementally just within that 562, 567 range, and before that, it's been around there, and all of a sudden it pops up 30 on the AM average, and popped up pretty another about the same percentage on the PM average. Is there anything there? Was there more rain, or what was the story there? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay.
There's no reason for me to. I don't have any obvious reason to
Right.
think.
It's getting close
why.
enough now, so if it bumped the same amount, you'd be at your limit next year. And I was just it's significant in that I was just driving through that area to do some of the site visits that we had, and the traffic is getting really, really heavy on the two main thoroughfares on both sides of the school. So just be part of the solution, if you would.
Something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paying attention to.
And for clarification, do these measurements take into account traffic flowing by and near the school or directly onto the campus?
Yeah, through the entrance.
Through the entrance, okay. And are there any impacts from Sacred Heart School's traffic? Causes backup on Valparaiso? What are the start times there, and how do you coordinate? How do two schools coordinate?
You know, I can't speak. I know I'm familiar with the traffic that you speak of. I certainly see the traffic on Valparaiso. Our measurements specifically are, onto our property through our gates. We have electronic monitoring in the street or in the pavement, right? We also, again, have our security daily check parking utilization and such. And there's a number of ways that we are pretty diligent about tracking and keeping people from parking off campus as well. Kind of a workaround. So that's another program that we are very aggressive about. Certainly we don't want any staff or students parking on nearby streets and bothering neighbors and such. And I would say our neighbors keep us diligent as well.
The only thing that you might consider, I don't know if you thought about it, was that there might be a way to get some kind of ride-sharing program between schools for staff or something like that. As the next level is there's a series of schools there, right? And so if there's any cooperation among staff for those schools that would pay off, that would be good, as long as they didn't have to drive in and get credit for dropping the person off. So, but so it's just one of those things where, I don't know, you're all getting close enough to your maximums. It'll be a factor for all those schools along that strip.
Yeah.
And then there's
I certainly
middle school as well, which Santa Cruz Avenue is heavily trafficked because of drop off and pick up there, and so there may be some growing impacts among those three schools.
Yeah, I know my counterpart at Sacred Heart, and so I'll commit to reaching out to him and talking to him about their program and what they're doing, and how we might work together. Like you said, whether that's start times or end times or all of those types of things.
One of the other things, I just happened to be driving up Valparaiso again this week a couple times, and I don't normally go that way because I don't like the traffic on it. But kids are trying to get across there, and there were so many cars for like a mile and two, that they basically, they had to wait until somebody actively let them across, rather than anything on the street that would be flashing or anything where they would be able to hit a button or whatever. So it may be something you want to look at it just in terms of that, because kids are crossing that street now, and they're of a height, and some of them are at a height that when they walk out from behind the SUV, there they are. So just something that, from a safety standpoint, that I spotted this week that I had seen before, but never quite as drastically as what I saw this week.
Yeah, I think it might be familiar. I drive Valparaiso every day. I think you're talking probably about the Sacred Heart crosswalk.
These kids, I didn't.
We're fortunate that our entrance is at a light,
Right.
and we do employ a crossing guard.
Okay.
And again, we're pretty strict about enforcing parking in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't think there's an issue with that. All right.
Can I ask one
Go
more
ahead.
question, sorry?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the city of Menlo Park help in any way? Because I think directly across from the school begins the Menlo Park.
It does, yeah,
Border.
one side of Valparaiso,
Right.
Atherton,
So, I
one
mean,
side Menlo Park.
I would hope that they would have shared interest in the safety of school children. Have you reached out to the city of Menlo Park for any brainstorming opportunities or
No,
discussions on mitigating?
I have not heard the concern myself before. You know, again, we're at a stoplight,
Right.
so kids are not crossing the street with or without a crossing guard in traffic or moving traffic. They definitely have a light or a walk sign.
I
To
couldn't
do
tell
that.
what school these kids were really going to. So, that whole street then is a place where there could be an opportunity to cross. But it just.
Agreed, there's kids everywhere and there's traffic everywhere, and
Right.
yeah, we want kids going home in the same way they came, for sure.
Yeah. Just might be a nice opportunity for your school to be the lead, be one that initiates a conversation like that. So you have multiple partners looking at and addressing it and helping pay for whatever they need.
Yeah, I appreciate the comment, the suggestion.
And by strategically coming here last year, you missed all the excitement around the field. So, you may want to make sure that is handled a lot differently than it was handled a few years ago when it was brought up. So I don't know what's going on there, but it was multiple exciting meetings just to talk about the field plan that was originally in place. So at this point, there's no movement ahead on that, or there's no framework to talk about on that?
There's really no movement whatsoever.
Okay.
You know, I don't think that we, the school and the college, are, you know, mutually agree to a path forward.
Okay.
We do talk about it from time to time, but there's no material change in the differences that we have.
Okay.
In some ways, we probably think that the school probably financially is in a different position than the college might be, and that probably means that we're more capable of doing certain things that the college isn't interested in for those very reasons.
Okay.
I think that might be the predominant reason why it doesn't move forward.
One of the issues was the use of the field during the summertime for non-school programs, area programs. Is that an issue at all that's going on?
I think the college relies on their camp programs, again, financially. That's
Right.
part of the financial strain that they're under to some degree. That's my understanding of it. Don't mean in any way to bash on the college or anything.
Right.
The school doesn't have those same issues. The camp programs and such for us are not something you'll see in our plan. I think it's been there for years, and it's always been our policy. We don't rent our facilities or otherwise, benefit financially from a use other than our own, right?
I just want to make sure there was no change to that.
No change whatsoever, and
The college had been more part of that than you. Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you.
yeah, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right. Anyone else to speak on this item? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate.
No comment?
does.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Looks like everything's in the right direction, just stay on top of the traffic. That's gonna be an issue next time, and it may not be your fault. Alright, but just that whole area, you'll be the scene of the crime. So just be aware of that, just try to make it, as, at least impactful as you can. Alright, need a motion?
Okay, I'll do it again, I guess.
Alright,
I move that the planning commission accept for filing the 2018 annual master plan update and the TDM monitoring report from the Menlo School.
I'll second.
Motion second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none, and none, not here. Alright, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
we have a scintillating program the rest of the night if you want to stay. Alright, item 5D, try to make it scintillating. Item 5D, heritage tree removal permit, 142 Almond Dwell. You got to start with staff report.
Thank you. So, yep, sorry.
Boy, I turned the page so quickly. Let's start with item 5C, heritage tree removal, 220 Park Lane. Let's do Park Lane because everybody's here for Park Lane. They're going, wait a minute, I'm next. All right.
So the request before you for a heritage tree removal permit at 220 Park Lane is requesting the removal of 2 heritage cedar trees. Both of these trees are located outside of the buildable area of the lot within the front yard. The property is already developed with a single-family residence and other improvements. The 2 trees requested for removal are entitled tree number 15 on all of the project submitted documentation. 15 is about 50 feet tall. It's located in the center front yard of the property, quite visible from the public right-of-way. The second tree being noted as tree number 18, slightly taller at 60 feet, also located in the front yard, but more towards the left side if you're standing in front of the property on Park Lane, and it's only about 10 feet from the shared property line to the neighbor on the left. So as I noted, tree number 15 in the front center of the property. The applicants have stated that the tree's presence does impede the property's ability to construct a circular driveway unless that driveway was to be shifted back closer towards the front of the main residence. Given the difference in topography or slope between the house and the street, which is slightly smaller, it also makes it difficult for the property to construct a drainage plan that would allow it to catch the on-site water runoff, with the amount of space that would be left available should that proposed circular driveway shift itself back. The project arborist report does note that tree 15 is impeding the growth of a nearby heritage oak tree, also on the subject property. The tree is noted as in fair health, but in poor condition. It's noted to have been neglected over time, has existing heavy limbs that likely need to be removed. By doing that, would further disfigure the tree's canopy and could exhibit more limb failure in the future. These conditions also, according to the project arborist report, suggest decay in the tree, and I noted the suppression of growth for a nearby heritage oak tree. The town arborist has reviewed the project arborist evaluations of both trees. I visited the site as well. While she notes that neither tree is determined to be dead or dangerous, according to its health, nor pose any imminent danger, she does concur that each tree is in poor condition and that more limbs will likely continue to break off given its existing health conditions. The applicant has proposed a replanting plan should the commission approve the removal of those 2 cedar trees, specifically 2 60-gallon box size native oak trees to be planted also within the front yard area, not in the exact same spots where these two trees are located, but also within the front yard area, both visible, of course, from the public right-of-way, which would help to mitigate and further screen the property as well. So with that, and as detailed in the staff report, staff is recommending approval of the two trees based on the conditions as listed in the draft heritage tree removal certificate. Happy to answer any questions that you have, and our town arborist is here as well.
Any questions, Jeff?
I have one question regarding the replacement plan. And in regards to the two cedars, the replacement plan would be two 60-gallon box-sized native oak trees. And then I was confused because Sally, on your report, it says at the end of site development, the applicant will be required to plant two 60-inch box oaks as well as 12 24-inch or 6 36-inch box and two 24-inch or 1 36-inch native oaks. So I was just kind of confused how that additional planting goes with the replacement planting for the two cedars.
So I'm just trying to show that because I approved additional trees on the site that were in poor health, they will have to plant a lot of replacement trees at the end of the project, because that's when we require them to final their project. They do have to replant the replacements.
So it's a landscaping plan.
A landscaping plan, and then I review it, and then I make sure the new plantings are planted, and then the building department can final their project.
Okay, so that's a way to isolate the two replacements separate from everything else that's done.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just trying to show that there have been I have approved multiple trees on the site.
Right.
So they do have a pretty hardy planting plan to fulfill. I do think we are getting two 60-inch native oaks for two cedars that aren't in great shape.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I denied them the first time. I have two corrections. Stephanie, it's not gallon, it's two 60-inch box trees. And then the oak tree that's next to the cedar, it's not a heritage tree, so it's my feeling that it will be removed. The little heritage tree that's next to the cedar. It's not a heritage tree, sorry. It's a tree that's not a heritage tree.
Yeah.
So I didn't really feel that was a compelling argument because in my experience, anything under 15 inches gets removed, and I think at the site currently everything has been removed except for the trees, the
Right.
heritage trees.
Right.
So that's the cedar on the left side of the
The cedar on the
driveway?
left side, yeah.
Is that,
Right.
they mentioned that in, I guess, one of the negative aspects of that cedar, that it's inhibiting the growth of that younger oak.
That's great if they're gonna keep it, but in my experience, they usually don't keep anything under 15 inches on site. Everything gets removed.
That's what's been going on lately.
Yep.
Yep. A lot of, all of a sudden empty lots everywhere drove recently.
Except for the few heritage trees
Right.
left, yeah.
There's rows and rows of trees everywhere except for the new development and then it's
Mm-hmm.
mowed.
Clear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
No, that was all.
Any other questions, Seth? I like the way you opine in all of our presentations. I haven't opined in a while, so. All right, we'll go ahead and open the public comment section for this. Is the applicant here? Or representative of the applicant?
Yeah.
Or both?
Yeah, both of us, actually.
All right.
I'm a representative, I'm Chris Franklin, and we're the landscape architects for the project.
All right. Anything to highlight that wasn't highlighted already?
No, I don't think so. I think, the explanation was pretty clear. Deodar cedar trees, typically you'd plant them, they're like park setting trees, and if they were healthy, they would have like a pretty healthy branching structure down that would be about 6 feet off the ground, and they'd be about 40 feet in diameter.
Yeah.
And these trees are anything but that.
Yeah.
And the the existing trees that are on the site that we're keeping are all the oaks, and they all are kind of on the perimeter. And we actually are truly planning on keeping the other oak on the other side, because there's also an existing oak that's not a native, that's not a heritage tree side on the kind of flanking both sides, and so we keep them. And all the trees on the site are not really, per the arborists, are not really in great condition, so we're gonna try and keep what's there, but we're keeping it, get it healthy, and then stick with the oak theme. So that was the intention of that as a plan moving forward.
Okay, cool. Any questions?
Yeah, I don't know trees that well, but I do like them. You know, oaks and redwoods especially, and cedars are like in the top 3 for me. But that cedar that's over by tree 18 that we were talking about, you said they plan on keeping it to keep the balance.
The oak,
I mean the oaks.
Yes.
That's what I meant to say.
yeah.
So when you if you were to take out that cedar, long term that would benefit that oak,
Tremendous.
right? Because it gives it a chance. But short term, how would it be affected by the activity of taking out the cedar tree?
We've confirmed with the arborist that it's just far enough that it's fine, that the oak tree will be healthy. And in fact, it will be, per the arborist, it will continue to be even more healthy. We're kind of lucky right now, it's big enough to give some height and some presence to the front of the property without, if it's not, huge and majestic yet. But it is starting with a really nice form right now. And it's just starting to lean a little bit, because it's just starting to get tall enough that the cedar's starting to inhibit. But if we were out there with the arborist kind of looking at everything, and he felt strongly that if we got rid of the cedar, it would, because it's young enough and still with a nice
Correct
form,
itself.
it would start to correct, and it has enough growth in its future.
So you're confident it would survive the process of the removal of that
Yes,
cedar?
yes, definitely.
And that's
The only tree that was in conflict with surviving, the one next door, was when we originally thought we were gonna keep the eucalyptus, and then found out it was dead and dangerous, so that had to go, so.
The matchstick. Yeah. There's nothing on the tree that's on the left in the middle. There's, when it's taken out, there's nothing on the other side of the fence at the neighbor's property that would be impacted by that.
No, I think they would just be happy to get, so far from what we understand, they'd be happy to get rid of the mess. It's having limb failure. The one on the side of the property is actually undergoing limb failure, and it has a root fungus. The other one, they're anticipating limb failure. So the one on the side of the property is actually having limb failure that affects both properties.
Okay, great. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you. All right. Anyone else here to speak on the item? She covered go ahead. This is item 5C.
Yeah, I was wondering, the nicest, most healthy and majestic trees on the lot actually were a fairy circle of mature sempervirens.
Yeah.
Are they being compensated for 2 for 1? Is that how the ordinance reads?
Sally, what?
So there were a bunch of trees in the buildable area, so only oaks are preserved in the buildable area, and they did have a lot of, like you said, redwood. I think they had some Canary Island pines, and so we don't have replacements for those because they don't have to get a permit, because they can just remove them. Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Good answer. All right. Yeah, that's been open for a while. That area had not had anything built around it for a while, right?
No.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else here to speak on the item? All right, then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion action as appropriate. Yeah, I got this one. When I saw the phrase fair health and poor condition, I was making sure it wasn't talking about me, but these are pretty straggly trees, so these didn't bother me at all. That one in the middle up front is like ugly. Ugly. Right?
I think they're on the right track.
Yeah, this one seems like these need to go before these cause some more problems. All right, need a motion?
I'll move that the planning commission find that the proposed removal of 2 heritage cedar trees at 220 Park Lane would not be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan for the reasons outlined in the staff report, and that the commission approve the tree removals subject to the conditions listed in the draft heritage tree removal certificate.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none. Then let's go ahead with what I wanted to do earlier, which is items 5D, 142 Almond Road for a Heritage Tree removal permit.
And I'll take that one.
All right, there you go. All right.
Alright, so the item on the agenda is for heritage tree removal for an incense cedar on 142 Almondale. The tree measures 24.8 inches in diameter, and the height of it is up to 60 feet. It sits on the side of the property line, close to the existing driveway, and close to the side, between the driveway and the side fence as well. The lot is a deep lot, but it's not. It's deeper than it is wide, so the tree itself is not very visible from the public right-of-way. The project arborist noted in the report that the tree is in fair condition, but he also notes that the trunk is leaning towards the existing driveway. As it is, it's not a problem currently, but if the tree that's not fully grown is allowed to continue to grow, it would damage the existing driveway. The town arborist, Sally, went to visit the site and noted that the root flare of the tree is only 1.5 feet from the driveway itself. She believes the driveway was actually built too close to the tree, but after looking at the site, she also notes that because of the presence of other large heritage trees on site, there's no real other options for a driveway within the site. The replanting plan, for this submittal is for 2 24-inch box flowering cherries. And while Sally notes that she would usually ask for a more sizable replanting plan, again, she goes back to the amount of already large heritage trees on site and how more heritage trees could actually affect those negatively. With that said, the arborist recommends removal of the town arborist recommends removal of the heritage tree, and staff recommends removal as well on the basis of future property damage to the existing driveway.
Any questions of staff? Was this the house that we had, there was a tree that was infringing on the swimming pool or something in the back? You had like a grove of redwoods in the back, and the one had to be removed, but
I don't think so. No, I have never been to this property before.
I've been to the property before. But
Okay.
It was another, but it was
Maybe
years
a
ago.
different, yeah.
It was at least 4 or 5 years ago.
So it is unfortunate. My goal since I've been here is to not have driveways be that close to a tree. But there's very large oak trees in the front of the property, so I can see why that was where they placed the driveway. And it's just unfortunate. It's just the wrong tree in the wrong place, kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know which came first, the driveway or the tree location, because the trees are also too close to the fence, right?
Right. It's just a very small growing area.
Right. And so I can see the oak tree being there, and then they put everything planted around the oak tree, and maybe that tree was there in the beginning, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
And then the neighbor has some pretty large redwoods.
Yes.
So everything's trying to compete with each other.
There's really pretty trees around there.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions of staff? All right, then we'll go ahead and open public hearing. Is the applicant or their representative here? You got your seat on StubHub too, huh? Good.
I'm what?
You got your seat on StubHub too. Okay.
I'm Lisa Agani, and my husband Marcel and I are the residents and property owners at 142. So, as Sally has cited, the tree, when we moved in 6 years ago or 7 years ago, we've taken great care to actually bring a lot of the trees that were declining back to health.
Right.
So you're more than welcome to come visit the property. You may have, but there's a lot of amazing trees on the property. We have over 15 redwoods and over 10 oaks.
I remember redwoods. I remember.
Yeah.
You
So
have roses too.
and roses, yes. So the problem is the driveway was there when we moved in, so we had nothing to do with the placement of the driveway. It's just unfortunate because it is a very long drive. So it's just, as I've said, it's kind of the round tree, and it is starting to lean. And we have delivery vehicles a lot of them, because we order off of Amazon a lot. So we've had to clear the branches and
I was
stuff.
wondering
and
about
it's-
that, exactly.
Yeah, so it's just on top of that being a safety issue, and I have a 12-year-old, soon to be 13-year-old son, so that tree is not an ideal place driving a car down there, a teenage boy either at some point in time, so it's just unfortunate, so. We love trees, obviously, on our property.
No, these properties are really nicely, well,
It's a very
really
unique,
nice.
we
Really
watch trees go down around us, but we try to keep the trees that we have and take good care of them, so.
All right, any questions?
Where were you planning on planting the flowering cherries?
So the most viable space is out in front. We already have cherries. We have some cherries that go along the drive, but they're planted and their girth won't get big. And then there's already 2 or 3. There's 2 out front, so we'll plant them just along the front. Because we have oaks. We have 6 oaks as you enter the property. So we hope that the cherry trees will be all there too. But there's really no other spot on the property to put any kind of tree. We're pretty maxed out.
So no good enough sun, do you think?
The cherries, well, we have a couple out there now, and they seem to be doing fine. So, and we talked with our arborist, and he thinks they'll be fine too.
Okay.
So, we have roses actually along the fence, and,
Yeah.
and those get some shade, and they seem to be doing fine. So
Okay.
we hope.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here to speak on item 5D? All right, then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back for discussion and action as appropriate with the commission. The only question I have, Sally, well, this was not a normal tree replacement type that we would normally have.
I usually don't replace evergreens with the deciduous
Yeah.
small trees. However, because of the site constraints, they do have a lot of beautiful oak trees in the front. And this is an empty spot in the right of way, so we're getting a benefit of a few more trees in the right of way.
Okay.
I'm accepting it, and it really is. If you're not removing an oak tree, it's not required that you replant with an oak tree.
Right.
So.
All right. I just wondered, it was just not a normal
Yeah.
replacement.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's all
And
right.
actually, I have a question on that,
Yeah.
real quick. And I just thought of this because you mentioned the right of way, because it would be outside the fence of the
Yeah.
private property. As those trees mature, would they become a hazard to cars or anything like that?
No, they will have to get an encroachment permit. I mean, there's a certain distance in that they need to be planted. And flowering cherries are kind of short-lived, so the oak trees might outlive the flowering cherries, so.
Okay. And just to make sure that we're not running into any PG&E issues or anything with the location.
So that should be, I mean, if you dig in the right of way, you're required to call for,
Okay.
the dig number to see if there's,
811 or
yeah.
Call before you do.
Yeah, call you before you dig,
Right.
so,
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't create a new problem.
right.
All right, anything else then? All right, then, looking for a motion.
I move that the planning commission find that the proposed removal of one heritage incense cedar tree at 142 Elmendale Avenue would not be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan for the reasons outlined in the staff report, and that the commission approve the tree removal subject to the conditions listed in the draft heritage tree removal certificate.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none? And one here. All right. Then the item, thank you very much for waiting. And now we're going to go to item 5E, which is the heritage removal permit at 68 Euclid Avenue. And we'll start with the staff report on this one too. We've got, just to be clear and to make sure everyone knows, we did get 2 more items that came in later or today. One was a letter from the person directly behind the property, or the owner of the property directly behind the property, and the other was an update to the replanning plan. All right, just to go on the record with that. All right, go ahead with the staff report. Thank you.
So, good evening. So tonight the commission is requested to take action on 2 interrelated items for the property at 16. First,
Close that back forward.
Someone's got it.
Thank you.
the first request is the request to certify an environmental document in the form of a mitigated negative declaration. The second is the associated request for the removal of 8 heritage redwood trees. So I'll get into a bit more detail on the specificities of both of those requests. We're just pulling up pictures of the trees so we can have them up on the screen for reference. A little bit of background. The property itself is slightly less than 1 acre in area, and it is improved with an existing main residence, swimming pool, associated pool equipment shed, and a detached garage. The property occupant is requesting to remove 8 heritage redwood trees that are all located along the rear property line, parallel to the rear property fence. Within all of the application materials that were submitted by the project applicant, those trees are numbered 1 through 8, and that's in sequential placement order, starting at the left side of the property and then working your way down to the right side of the property. Trees 1 through 6 are sort of the closest together as you start at the left and work your way to the right, and then I would describe it as a bit of gap space where then trees 7 and 8 are also closely located to amongst the 2 of themselves. So as noted in much more detail in the staff report as well as the applicant's submittal materials, their requests to remove the 8 trees are for 4 primary reasons. The first reason is for damage to existing structures. Specifically, the pool and pool shed were evaluated by a project structural engineer, as included in the applicant's submittal materials, as causing damage and also as having probability to cause future damage to those structures, as well as the existing detached garage on the farther right end of the property, also discussed as having potential for future damage given the trees' young age, and we'll talk about that as well, the fact that they're not fully grown to maturity yet, thus neither are their root systems fully grown to maturity yet. The second reason or basis for the request is for the ability of the property occupant to have safe use and enjoyment of the property. The project arborist report notes that the root systems of these trees do protrude above the ground, which is prohibiting the occupant from being able to use, noted as approximately the rear 20 feet of the property, that area for doctor prescribed rehabilitation efforts, as well as the fact that the root systems of these trees, as they protrude above the ground, present serious tripping and safety hazards for the project application submittal materials. The property occupant is proposing to construct a walking path as shown on the proposed plans around the perimeter of the property, I would describe it, starting at the left, working its way down the rear property line and down the right, all terminating behind the main residence, so all within the, call it, rear yard area or behind the house. The third reason for the requested removal for the project applicant is for privacy and the inability to plant any screening in that rear yard area, as the soil and shading conditions created by these redwood trees they have found to make it difficult for other vegetation to be planted underneath them. And then lastly, they note the excessive water use that they have found as required to keep these trees healthy and alive. As I alluded to earlier, These are young redwood tree specimens. They are estimated to have been planted approximately 20 to 25 years ago. So that is the summary of the property and the basis of the request before you to remove the trees. I want to now take the time to discuss the first component of a request before you, which is the environmental documentation. The Atherton Municipal Code does require the preparation of an environmental document for requests to remove a certain number of heritage trees for lots of specific sizes. So as this property is less than 1 acre in area and is requesting to remove 2 or more trees, the project is also subject to the environmental review. So under the provisions of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, an initial study was prepared to identify any impacts to the environment. And a determination was made based on that study that any environmental impacts that could be created as a result of this project could be dropped to a level of insignificance through incorporation of specific mitigation measures. Thus, the decision was made to prepare a mitigated negative declaration. Impacts, I'll just give a real brief summary of the conclusions of that mitigated neg dec. Impacts to the topics of aesthetics, air quality, biological, cultural resources, hydrology, and water quality were identified. And as I mentioned, specific mitigation measures were developed to address each of those impacts. These mitigation measures have been incorporated as conditions of approval in the draft heritage tree removal certificate should the commission approve the project before you tonight. In accordance with CEQA, the document was circulated for public review for a minimum of 20 days. No public comment was received. You'll note that there's an errata at the end of the mitigated neg dec that corrects 2 typographical errors within the document. So moving on to the entitlement request or the application request to remove the 8 heritage trees. The request is evaluated for demonstrated compliance with all applicable town municipal code ordinances as well as applicable general plan policies. As noted, all 8 trees are located along the rear of the property, estimated to be somewhere between 20 to 25 years old, which is relatively young in age for a redwood tree, and planted after the property was developed with its single-family home, garage, and swimming pool. The town arborist has visited the site numerous times. She's reviewed all the project materials, including 2 separate project arborist reports that were submitted as part of this application, prepared an opinion memo, also included as an attachment to the staff report. She does not find any of the trees to be in poor condition and notes specifically that tree number 5 has documented conditions showing damage to existing structure. Tree number 5 is the only recommended tree that the town arborist is recommending for approval based on damage to existing structure. She does agree with the project arborist's opinions that there is documented potential for future structural damage to the existing swimming pool, its associated pool shed, by primarily trees number 1 through 5, potentially 6, while trees number 7 through 8 on the other end of the property also, given their young age and anticipated future growth of the root systems, have probability to cause damage to that existing detached garage with, there's some additional, I think, ancillary living or floor area space behind the use of the garage. As I mentioned, all of these 8 trees were planted after the house was built. So without being able to pull up any historical documents that showed any approved landscape screening plan that the town would have required when the house was originally constructed, staff's best that those trees were planted with the intention to provide screening between the two properties. And specifically, when I say the two properties, the property to the rear. It does appear that the trees were planted too close together. Since they're planting and the way indicative of how the redwood trees have grown thus far, have grown, I don't want to use the word too tall, but the lowest point of the tree limbs and the topmost point of the fence, as you can see in these pictures, and as we were able to see when we visited the site, have created this visual gap between this property and the property to the rear, thus aren't providing the full amount of screening that perhaps was otherwise intended at the time of the original planting. So the applicant has proposed a replanting plan, which is shown on the plans before you to include a total of 16 trees relative to the request of these 8 heritage trees to be removed. These are all evergreen in species, so they have leaves year-round. They include Douglas fir and holly-leaf cherry trees, primarily along the sides and towards the front of the property. Just note, there's one typographical error in the staff report that you notice the holly-leaf cherry as deciduous in species. It's evergreen as well.
Okay, I was wondering about that. That was a different breed than I knew of.
And then in addition to those trees, the proposed replanting plan also shows the installation of a bougainvillea plant, which is almost a climbing vine type plant along the back fence. With the fence height regulation, according to our zoning ordinance, that fence can't be taller than 6 feet. So the bougainvillea could not grow taller than 6 feet, maybe a foot or so, if it could hold its own weight above the fence. So the bougainvillea was not found to provide adequate screening for the reasons that I just made mention of. Should the commission make a determination of finding consistency in order to approve the application tonight for the tree removal, staff is recommending a revised replanting plan. You'll note the memo that Chair Lane made reference to earlier. There is a draft heritage tree removal certificate that's included in your packet. Post distribution of that packet, staff has had conversation with the project applicant team. Staff had made suggestions of some potential species to be planted in lieu of the holly-leaf cherry trees, which in the opinion of out-of-town arborists are found to be more ornamental and not necessarily a comparable species to a redwood tree. The applicant expressed concern with planting replacement trees along the side property line that would be much taller than that, given the overhead high voltage lines that currently exist and their height of approximately 20 feet or so. The additional staff recommendation as it relates to the replanting plan and future revisions to that replanting plan would be to include additional plantings along the rear property line. The plan in your packet does not show anything beyond the bougainvillea vine along the fence. And like, as I mentioned, no original landscaping plan as approved by the town was found or documented. There is a noted visual gap under current conditions in terms of any screening between the two properties, at least if you're standing on the ground level. While the canopy of the trees does obviously provide some element of green and potentially some screening if you were on a second floor, the recommendation is intended as an attempt for the application of the tree removal to best meet establish town policy pertaining to landscape screening, privacy, and good forestry practices, which are all established general plan policies, and those are noted within the staff report. So as I mentioned, the memorandum that was left for each commissioner and copies for the public as well is recommending some revised language to condition number 2 of the draft heritage tree removal certificate. The changes noted have to do with greater specificity on the types of replanting plans to be revised from the current replanting plan provided, based on the discussions that we have had with the project applicant. The intent of those revisions was to still, to the best of our ability, show a replanting plan that met established town policies and goals for screening, as well as replacement for tree removal, while at the same time of trying to avoid recreating the condition that the applicants have noted currently, which include the species with their protruding root systems and the inability to utilize that space in their yard. So staff has evaluated this application and combined with the proposed revised replanting plan, as noted, is recommending approval of the tree removals, again, combined with the revised replanting plan based on potential for future probability of property damage, for the application's ability to meet the spirit and intent of both the town's accessibility ordinance. The accessibility ordinance is purposed to provide people with disabilities reasonable accommodation in the rules, policies, and procedures set forth by the town, as well as the purpose of the landscape screening ordinance, which itself is purposed to reduce the impact of structures on neighborhoods and to provide for the maintenance of the individual privacy of homes in a neighborhood to thus require landscape screening where appropriate. In terms of public outreach and public comment on the application, there were 4, I believe, letters submitted as part of this application from adjacent neighbors' side across the street, and one that I believe was anonymous in terms of its location that noted support of this application for the removal of the 8 trees. And then following distribution of the packet received this morning and distributed to the commission and copies for the public, there was an additional item of public comment also received from the property owners directly to the rear of this site at 67 Marymount. So with all of that, I'm happy to answer questions that I'm sure the commission may have. I see the project applicant and I believe some other folks representing the application are here as well. If you have specific questions of them or their application materials.
Are there any questions, staff?
I don't think so.
And I have some questions for you after I hear the testimony, Sally, on some of the trees.
I just had one quick question on, I was kind of looking through here. So originally, there was some concern about following condition 2, is that right? As far as resistance from the applicant in following condition 2, and I'm trying to see how that whole process worked out.
Sure. There, the applicant expressed some concerns in the recommended species that are noted in the Planning Commission packet that was distributed for the plantings along the rear property line. They had some concerns, I think specifically that those particular species may attract rodents that, let's see here, I'm just reading their ability to serve as screening. And so conversation was had with us in the planning department and with the town arborist on trying to figure out an alternative planting species that wouldn't create the condition that their applicants are finding to be problematic with their property right now, as well as still meet the intent of the landscape screening ordinance to provide that visual green buffer between the two properties. And so the memo before you with the recommended language changes indicate a species that we have found to meet both of those goals.
All right, any questions?
One more question. So, with this replacement plan, does that specify that they would go as screening, or would they just be, would it be up to the owner where to place things?
The language is specific as to where it does state additional plantings along the rear property. And then it gives reference to a couple suggested species, but also leaves the ability for other appropriate species to potentially be identified as well, all subject to review and approval by the town staff.
So that's the bottom line as far as staff would review where things are being placed
And the species and the size and.
Okay. All right.
Maybe that's it?
Mhm.
Okay, let's go ahead and open a public hearing for all the patient people in the back. All right.
Hi, good evening. My name is Frank Huang, and I'm here tonight representing Monet Paints LLC. That's the technical title owner of the property. And I've also got with me the actual current resident, as well as our land use attorney, Camus Steinmetz. They'll also make some brief comments. And also available in attendance is our arborist, Kevin Kilty, and all of us can address any questions that you guys may have. I'd just like to take about a minute with some other further brief words about the application. Essentially, the owner, we bought this property as a retirement home for the current resident, for her to enjoy her life in a healthy, serene, and safe environment. As your staff mentioned, and in our application, the current trees are interfering with that objective. They're damaging the structure of the property, they're preventing additional screening, and as well as the amount of excessive water that needs to be used as it's growing. In terms of just hopefully, doing the right thing, we did also reach out to all 40 neighbors within 500 feet of the property, giving them the opportunity to comment on this. As she noted, 4 people came back with positive letters, nearby neighbors. And as for also the one letter received today from the neighbor behind who lives in Switzerland, we would just note that that letter asks you to, carefully consider how removal of the trees would be consistent with the spirit and letter of the applicable Atherton Municipal Code, and that you avoid granting exceptions that favor any homeowner over another. It's a fair point, but as the staff report also concluded, your town code does allow for heritage tree removal, provided a permit is issued upon the Planning Commission's finding that the tree removal does not conflict with your general plan. And again, I think the recommendation falls under that. And also, our request for the removal, and combined with our proposed replacement plan as enhanced by the recent discussions on Condition 2, this should not conflict with the general plan or the zoning ordinance. Therefore, we're just, again, thank you for the time and respectfully request that you follow the staff's recommendations and grant the approval of our application to remove them. If you don't mind, a couple of other members of our group would like to speak now.
All right, yeah, they earned the right to speak by staying around.
Okay.
I'm next. I apologize.
That's all right.
I'm going to try this. Okay. Good evening, Chair Lane, Commissioners Sinelli, Lerner, Sakala. I am the resident, and yes, this home was purchased for me to enjoy in my retirement years. The owner and I have thought long and hard about these redwood trees. We love redwood trees. They're just in the wrong place and hamper my ability to walk in that area and to use that area. The roots have already tilted the utility shed, and we know the roots are at the pool. It's just a matter of time. And what is ironic, we recently found out that the back neighbor's pool is right on the other side of the fence. If, the roots they don't see the fence. If they're at our pool, they're at the neighbor's pool. So we're a little concerned about that. The trees shade most of the property about half the year, axis, orbit, that stuff. And, require so much water. In fact, which trees require what water and where the roots are. Professor Tonelli, excuse me, Commissioner Tonelli was...
we call him Professor Tonelli.
Oh, okay. He was at the property this afternoon, and, we were standing on the grass, and I said, I know the roots from tree number 6, are under the grass, and, we've been told they're at the pool. And he said, oh yeah, I can feel them. And I'm going, gee, that's why the grass is lumpy. Many of the trees do not even provide any screening. They just, the lowest limbs are 14, 15 feet above ground. As a result of several surgeries, I'm in physical therapy and required to walk on a daily basis. Hopefully walk fast someday, take long strides, run for cardio. And the backyard is private. The front is public. I have major security issues. I have been stalked. I've had death threats. I'm terrified of being kidnapped or worse. It's not safe for me to do this walking, these exercises in public, and the backyard is the only private area of the property. In my current condition, I can't walk around under the redwood trees because I'll trip and fall. And when I fall, I can't get up. Working on that. My landscape architect, Tina, and I have worked really hard to come up with an acceptable replanting plan. Replacement codes under Municipal Code 8.10. This was no easy task because there are over 100 plantings, trees, shrubs, etc. on the property. In fact, I think it was Commissioner Sokolov, maybe I should call her Professor too. When she was there yesterday, she noted, oh my gosh, this is really a full landscape. So Tina and I were trying to figure out where do we put, more trees. So for all of these reasons and the ones we've disclosed in our application, we respectfully request that you grant our application to remove the trees and the roots. And this will make a tremendous difference in my life. Thank you. Yep. Didn't even have to turn like a penguin. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Kama Steinmetz. I'm the land use attorney representing both the owner and the resident of the property. And I'd first like to thank staff for their very thorough review and evaluation of the application, for the recommendation to grant approval of our application, and for working with us to revise condition number 2 to meet our concerns per the memo that you received today. And this calls for an increase in the box size of the 5 Douglas fir, as well as recognizing that English laurel and oleander would be adequate screening along the rear fence line. As pointed out in the staff report, these trees were not original to the property at the time the lot was created. and they were not required as a condition of the construction of the residence. They were planted years after the house was built by the previous owner without thought to how large or expansive the root systems would grow and the problems that they would cause over the years. So after meeting with the town arborist and planning staff and incorporating their suggestions, we filed our application. And an initial study and an MMD was prepared per CEQA given the number of trees proposed, and it concluded that the project would result in no significant environmental impacts that could not be mitigated. Municipal Code Section 8.10.040E provides that the Planning Commission shall grant the heritage tree removal permit unless it finds that the removal of the subject tree would be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan of the town. And as concluded in the staff report, and I quote, "It is the planning staff's opinion that the removal of these 8 redwood trees combined with the recommended replanting plan to be enhanced would not be contrary to the purpose or intent of the general plan." So we respectfully request that you follow staff's recommendation and approve our application subject to the conditions as revised. And in the event there is a motion to modify staff's recommendation, we request the opportunity to respond. Thank you.
If there's a motion that's put on the table, then and the staff and the commission moves on it, then you would be eligible to go ahead and appeal the decision, but we wouldn't open the public hearing again. All right. All right. We're gonna hear from our arborist.
Unless you have questions.
Yeah. I do. So I want to hear both. I want us to hear all the arborists in the room. All right, good. All right. So I understand 1 through 5. As a matter of fact, they're 1 through 5 are on a spa between 2 swimming pools. They're probably having a field day going. So 1 through 5 makes a lot of sense to me. 6, 7, and 8 don't make much sense to me. All right. So and I'm going to check with Sally on 6 in terms of the split top aspect of it. But the health of those trees seems to be pretty good, and the spacing on at least 6 seems pretty good. And there are things that can be done to make the roots not surf with different watering techniques, correct?
At this stage, you probably won't improve it. We might be able to keep it from getting much worse, but yeah, the watering technique should have been incorporated when the trees were quite a bit younger to get deeper rooting.
Water deep. 7 and 8.
7, 8. The biggest problem with them is they're in behind the garage. Eventually, they're going to cause a bit of problem. If there's any plan to put any solar panels or any either for heating the pool with water or for electrical, there's going to be a problem with that. Yeah, 7 and 8 are more of a down the road problem that eventually we will have root problems there in the restricted root zone.
Okay. All right, that was my read too. I mean, we're talking about down the road 20 years.
Hard to tell, yeah. With redwoods, it's really hard to tell on how well the structure was built at the time of building.
Just real quick, just to kind of vamp on the watering technique with regards only to 7 and 8 and possible future damage, and you can't improve what's there, but you can stave off future damage. So what could you do now to make sure those roots don't affect that accessory, the garage?
Well, what you'd have to do is incorporating a watering style that was a deeper, watering at a deeper level, which would have to be used with, probably a lot of the water would be done by professionals, like a spray company. They'd come in, they'd deep root water or feed at the same time the tree to try to get the attraction for the roots to be lower in the soil. Whereas with normal sprinkler head watering, say like on a golf course or a lawn, everything's up on top, the roots just stay where the food is. Redwoods really love water, so they'll go get it, you know. In the forest, redwoods have a big layer of duff, and it's quite insulated there. There's not a lot of compaction, so that the roots don't become a problem. Whereas, as we've all seen in areas like Atherton, the roots go after water, and we've seen them go 50, 60 feet to get water and be quite large. So how we could stave off the future root problem of those trees, not positive what success we'd have with it, but
deeper water would help it, and that's
deeper water is always good. The problem, with redwoods in town, and you guys deal with it quite a bit, is they're really not a good tree in this area. They require too much water. They want they want to be up like on Skyline, where they're getting the constant moisture. The fog of today, say, they turn that into rain, and it's soaking underneath those, because they just grab that water. So that's their environment. We've brought them in here, and it's even worse down south and in the East Bay. And I think they brought into evidence what Portola Valley, which is even closer to the native area of redwoods, thinks of redwoods. They're really down on them. So they're just not the right tree around here, but we've got a lot of them. We've got some beauties, and every time we go into the drought, they suffer out pretty good. So.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. All right. Thank you. You want to talk about the landscaping plan a little bit? Just any details on that we need to know about?
To me,
I'm trying to make sure everybody gets paid for what they came to do.
I'm Tina Harvicky. I'm the landscape architect, and the client and I work together to try to find space on the property for these mitigation trees and screening shrubs. And as you know, there's like about 100 trees on the property, so it was challenging to find space where things would not recreate the same situation that we're trying to avoid by taking out the redwoods. With the walking path at the back, the idea was that we could plant something that would be relatively narrow, which was why a vine was decided upon. And I can attest to having a neighbor in Santa Clara that she has a bougainvillea vine. I don't know how old it is, but it's probably 12 or 13 feet tall, and it's well above the fence,
Right.
and it's supporting itself. We had chosen the Prunus ilicifolia because it's a native, and on that right property line, we wanted something that would be short enough that it wouldn't interfere with the power lines, that would form a good, dense hedge, but not, be really tall. We actually need more lower screening on that side, as I've witnessed the neighbor's dog barking at us many times when we're standing out there talking. We also were, trying to work with the town arborist in proposing the Douglas fir out in front, where, we would be, in a way, replacing the tall canopies that we would be taking away in the back, but just moving them to the front, so it would be more visible as far as the right-of-way goes.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, great. All right. Thank you. Send yourself. All right. All right. Anyone else here to speak on the item? Go ahead.
I was just wondering, is consideration given to what's evident when someone purchases a property, and would that induce a kind of estoppel later, unless conditions have changed from when they buy it?
Potentially, if there'd been something required in the plan for some specific reason, potentially. I don't know of any situation like that in the town specifically. In this town, anyway. I've seen it in homeowners associations and things like like that, but we don't have that in this situation for sure. Thank you. All right. Does anybody else want to talk one more time? All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and actions appropriate. So Sally, I had quite a couple questions for you. I'm still having I'm struggling with trees 6 and 7 and 8. Okay. So 1 through 5, I've gone there 3 times for one different to do different things. Then I've gone over to the other the block behind and looked at the trees to see the impact of the trees from the block behind. I didn't go on the property behind, but I did go up on the street. All these trees will have an impact on both streets. I mean, visually. There's virtually at least 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7, 8. They look like one tree, and from the other side. They all can be seen from the back side, and 6, 7, and 8 can be seen from the front, along with the tops of the 1 through 4 trees. 1 through 5, though, I think have to come out for a lot of reasons. It's in the wrong location. It's between 2 reservoirs.
Water would be a problem.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, it's just a matter of time before that's just bad news. 6, 7, 8, though, I'm not seeing the same problems, particularly if there's mitigation done to the watering technique on them. So tell me what the story is on 6, 7, 8.
6, 7, 8 are very healthy redwood trees. Obviously, the trees are going. I mean, they're concerned with water, but they're watering their lawn and all the additional plantings on their property. So the redwood roots are chasing after the lawn water. So maybe they could eliminate a little bit more of their lawn. They could move the path somehow so it's a little bit shorter in the back. But I mean, if you're removing those other trees, I'm sure there could be a way the landscape architect could design a path that would give them a little more room to walk and preserve these trees. As for them being located next to the garage, I don't know that we didn't really discuss this because it wasn't found there wasn't damage. So I don't know how many feet away they are from the garage, but 8 times away from the largest tree over there is 14 feet, and I'm pretty sure the garage is 14 feet away, and that's the standard that if they were going to build something new, they would need to be at least 8 times away. So, I mean, they're fitting into the criteria currently if somebody wanted to put a garage.
Right. So, okay.
While we're asking Sally questions, what about tree 6 and the twin top on tree 6?
I mean, it's not ideal to have the two limbs like that. It's ideal to have the single trunk. However, I don't think it's affecting the tree right now. If in the future it becomes a problem, then I can review it again. But at this point, I don't think there's any problem. Both arborists didn't think it was a problem either.
Yeah, it looks totally healthy. It just looks slightly. It looks like two tips on the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've been growing that way for a while, but based on the length of, because it goes pretty far down. I thought it was at the top. As I got closer to it, I realized that it was farther down than I thought. So it was hard to work with the applicant on the screening of the back fence, and we're just trying to mitigate any future issues with the neighbor, which did come up today, and they would like some screening back there. So the vine is not something I approve for screening, whether it's good in Santa Clara or not. It would need to, in 5 years, screen 13 feet, which I don't think the Bougainvillea is going to do that. So English laurel is used as screening around here a lot. It's not ideal to me because you're taking away this natural, beautiful, large stature trees and you're putting in English laurel. But however, the other plantings will count towards the redwoods, and this is just additional screening to mitigate anything in the back. But as the neighbor stated, it will be a big loss.
Can I ask a question? If we had looked at this as, if we looked at the health-related concerns and needs separately for 6, 7, and 8. Are we required, or is the town required to consider ADA related issues ahead of what our general plan asks us to do?
Do you want me to jump in? So Stephanie and I have been discussing this, and we do have a section under the code, like she mentioned, 17.17, that does talk about that. It is really a separate process. What you're asking for is a reasonable accommodation, and there are findings that have to be made. We would verify the status of that person qualifying under that, more than just a simple letter from the doctor. So, there are 3 different findings that have to be made on that would be made, that can be delegated to the planning commission to make that decision. We are considering what appeared in the staff report and the health-related things as sort of a side note, but the primary determination is really, as we've discussed, for the tree removal, like you do every tree removal. And so, I think it's relevant to consider what they want to use it for, but we're not treating this as a strict, is this a protected use? Do we have to make a reasonable accommodation sort of procedure? Because that would be a separate procedure if that is the sole basis for that decision. So.
But it sounds like staff is comfortable enough that 6, 7, and 8 could be included, so it's like a package deal. Like all of the trees are actually being looked at as creating the same issue.
We're looking at consistency with general plan, and with the removal of, including now 6, 7, and 8, could that be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan, which is the required finding that the commission needs to make in order to grant tree removal? I've listed some suggested policies, primarily as they relate to probability of future damage related to 6, 7, and 8, outlier of the swimming pool and pool shed for 6, 7, 8 for the detached garage patio area. Secondly, good forestry practices, another general plan policy that speaks to the number of trees a parcel of land could support. And then thirdly, related to policy suggested on privacy and how, if the trees were proposed to be removed, given the privacy or lack of privacy screening that they're providing, could be conditioned or mitigated through a revised replanting plan as suggested.
I struggled with this quite a bit, just for the record, for a number of different reasons. Number one, I love redwood trees. And I always respect and really take into consideration staff's recommendations. But at the same time, I always pay attention to what Sally says. We're kind of getting conflicting signs there. That makes this issue even more difficult. We're talking about neighbors and the well-being of one person, which is a major consideration. And then how the effect on the property affects not only the adjoining neighbor, but the neighborhood, like you went out and looked at, does kind of affect the overall landscape of both streets. So there's a balancing act that goes in there and making sure that, and as you always say in different issues that in the time that I've been on the commission, this is about being good neighbors and making sure that we come up with something that suits the property owner and the neighbors, and that lends to condition 2 and the screening practices and all that. So there's a lot of juggling going on here and a lot of balancing and conflicting signs of, it's not clear cut in any one particular direction, other than it looks like those roots are encroaching on the pool area and the applicant's yard, and maybe, we don't know, we haven't inspected it, on the other side of the yard. So that's a major consideration. Bottom line is, the way I look at this is very similar to what you brought up. The 5, while I hate to see a clear cut of a small grove, I can see the benefit for the applicant in her recreation in the yard and what she needs to do in her therapy. And I can see the benefit for the yards and future damage possible to the pools. 6, 7, 8, like you said, I don't think are as clear cut. I spoke with the applicant about the twin top tree number 6, and she had a previous bad experience at a previous property with a tree similar to that didn't fare too well. So she's a little nervous about that, and that I think is worth considering. I think that's legit. So it boils down to me, 7 and 8 are beautiful trees. They haven't been trimmed like the other 5. They're full, they have a nice canopy. So for me, I could look at certainly the 5, like you said, possibly 6, 7 and 8, I have a tough time with.
I agree. I wish this were 2 separate proposals.
We can make
It's
it
tough.
we can make it 2 separate proposals in the motion.
Okay.
Right. And
I
that's
think some of us might be more comfortable with
Right.
that. Mhm.
right. Yeah, I'm comfortable with 1 through 5, no doubt about it. Before they destroy 1 pool for sure, or maybe 2, and it creates a space for openness. The pool creates a lot of unusable space for walking in the yard. Actually, as much as the trees in those areas. Plus, the shed back there gets in the way too. So I don't know. There are some things that are been done from a decision for how the property was used originally that mitigate what might be done too. So maybe a bridge over the pool. but that's a deal. So I'm totally comfortable on a motion for 1 through 5, but definitely not on 6, 7, 8. So if we're ready for a motion on 1 through 5, I can make that motion.
Let's negotiate a little bit here.
Yeah.
Can you consider adding 6? So
No,
that's 1 through 6.
I don't see anything that can't be fixed on 6 either by the way that the lawn is treated in terms of the dirt on it. Here's the problem I have with in the 5 years that I've been on this planning commission, almost 6. I've seen many more trees close to a property line with design choices that oh darn it, that's going to make it so we can't make our circular driveway, or oh darn it, it'd really be nice if I could have a straight shot view of the mansion that we're going to create. And they were all things that were that were things that we said no to. All right, so I'm looking at the consistency over time of why something is done. All right, 1 through 5. Clearly, under all conditions of any place in town, I could see taking down. 6, I could see doing some other things that would allow that tree to exist and make it not any worse and make it walkable in the area. And I have 5 trees on my own property that I wish I could get smoothed out, but they that's the way they were grown, and I couldn't get them torn down. So I'm looking at over time consistency for the town. And what we've done over time, 1 through 5 made it look totally consistent to me. 6, 7, and 8 don't, and definitely 7 and 8. 6, I just don't see a specific. If I thought that 6 was a threat to any structure, then I'd say okay, fine. If I thought it was a situation where a path couldn't be worked around it somehow, or a path over the area couldn't be worked on, I'd say maybe, but. When I look at the property, those are all mitigatable things that are more mitigatable in my mind than taking down a redwood tree that looks nice. That's healthy.
Paul, when you were on the property today, you said the lawn was lumpy. So, assuming those were the roots.
Well, that's what I assumed they were, but it wasn't dug out like the other 5 trees have been.
Right.
Where the roots are evident.
Right. If assuming that
could have just been a lumpy lawn.
They could very well have been, or gophers. Would it be logical that those lumps could be created from 6, 7, or 8, or all of the above?
The closest tree I thought was 6.
6.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have a tremendously lumpy lawn that I deal with.
And no redwoods?
No, I have 4 redwoods.
Okay.
They're about 60 years old. And the roots are very evident, like Kevin was talking about with the surface water. So I've seen it, and I think there are things, I agree with with Eric, I think there are things you can do to mitigate it. I was speaking to the nervous applicant because of her previous experience with a twin top tree like that. But this one looks, you know, like a fairly healthy tree. I know looks and actual health are two different things when it comes to trees. So.
I have a question for staff. If we would go ahead with the 1 to 5 as a separate motion, the portion of the motion that has to do with the negative deck, we want to make that specific to the 5, and then if someone else wanted to propose, because the negative deck was applicable to 1 through 8, as I understood it, and I can't make that finding for 6, 7, and 8. All right, so that's technically a different thing than the motion for the removal of the trees.
Right, and I know the motion to certify the environmental document needs to happen before any motion is considered for decision on the entitlement request to remove the heritage trees. Now, amending the motion to certify the prepared environmental document as revised relative to the entitlement.
Yeah, I know the history on that.
That's the question, right?
That's right.
Boy, I maybe would help her.
Well, I can make that easy. I can vote no on the negative deck, and then if it passes, then that's cleared for a parsed vote on the trees themselves. You understand what I'm saying on this one? The negative declaration is a much more directed methodology, and it's basically a mini EIR. And it is an EIR, and then but randomly choosing to accept or deny part of that doesn't.
Right.
I don't think that's something I know we do directly.
So it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
The certifying of it is to say, they didn't miss anything, they didn't forget to take something into account, you're sort of looking at it for completeness, which doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with regards to 6, 7, and 8. So what I think you could do is certify it with regards to all of it, and then go on and say, okay, but with regards to 6, 7, and 8.
So just certifying the document rather than dealing with anything with the trees.
Right. That's just like any other EIR, which is basically said we looked at everything, we looked at the impacts of everything, and here's the way, and then separately, here's the way we choose to address it.
Under our general
Right.
plan,
All right, got it.
conformity in this case,
I'm okay
not
with
with regards to the page.
Does that make sense? All right, I understand that. That makes
Does that
sense
make
to
sense
me.
to you?
Yeah.
And I've done that before on big transportation projects and other things where we accepted the EIR and then didn't do the recommendation on that.
Okay, so long as the nature of the project under the entitlement does not have the potential for increased impact, then the document still.
Yeah, that's correct. All right.
Eric, I do agree with you. I think you bring up a very valid, important point as far as consistency is concerned. That's one thing I had a very difficult time with, not only on this item tonight, but the other heritage tree issues we dealt with, and making sure that we're consistent. So in that regard, I totally understand where you're coming from as far as having more of a basis for the removal of 1 through 5 because of their proximity to the pool and all the different reasons stated in the staff report, but not being as clear on 6, 7, and 8. I think that precedent is very, very important to consider.
Okay. All right. I'm ready to make a motion. I move that the Planning Commission certify that the 68 Euclid Avenue tree removal project initial study mitigated negative declaration is complete, adequate, and complies with the California Environmental Quality Act.
A second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. And then I'll further move that the Planning Commission find the proposed removal of 5 heritage trees, redwood trees, 1 through 5 at 68 Euclid Avenue in Atherton would not be contrary to the purpose and the intent of the general plan for the reasons outlined in the staff report, and that the Commission approve the tree removal subject to the conditions as listed in the draft heritage tree removal certificate.
And as, so excuse me, through the chair,
Yes.
with language as recommended to be amended.
Yes, with the mitigation language as recommended, be modified. Motion? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Now anyone else can make a motion on items 5, 6, 7, and 8, or 6 alone and 7 and 8, however the rest of the group feels about it. I'll just be voting no on all of them, but that doesn't mean you can't make the motions.
So a motion for tree 6, then if we wanted to vote on that
Right.
Separately?
separately.
And you
A
just-
separate motion for the removal of,
You do the same second paragraph here and just highlight tree 6.
right, exactly. Do we have a motion?
Well, you're gonna make it.
Back at me in the corner.
Don't look at me,
All
I've
right.
already made clear what I would do.
I further move that the planning commission find that the proposed removal of one heritage tree, number 6, at 68 Euclid Avenue, would not be contrary to the purpose and intent of the general plan for the reasons outlined in the staff report, and that the commission approve the tree removals subject to the conditions as listed in the draft heritage tree removal certificate.
Need a second?
I'll second that.
Move to second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I see now. I just want to make sure.
Mhm.
3, 1. All right. Any movement on 7 or 8? Anybody ready to move on 7 or 8, or leave it alone?
Well, how does that work, then? If we don't do a motion, it's just not
No.
included, or do we need to make a motion?
No, we don't need to make a motion.
We don't need to.
We just approve 1 through 6.
Let me ask you a question. If in 5 years the applicant wants to come back, ask about 7 and 8, because it's 2 heritage trees on less than an acre, the whole secret process has to be gone through again?
The secret process would not have to be, it's more than 2, I'm sorry. I
Oh,
misspoke
more than
earlier.
2,
I
okay.
said 2 and 1,
Okay.
it's more than 2.
Okay.
And that, it would only come back to the commission if, presuming in 5, 10, 20 years from now, at that point of request, the trees were determined to not be dead or dangerous, unless the ordinance changes in 5, 10, 20 years from now.
And I won't be here 20 years from now to be yellow. It'll make a lot easier.
I don't have any more motions, Adam.
All right, any more motions?
Right to appeal?
Yes, the right to appeal. So you have 7 days, is it 7?
In writing,
Yeah.
and it's at the end.
10
days.
In writing
10
at the
days.
end.
10 days to appeal the decision.
And if, I assume you know about 1717, and if there are any issues, FHA, ADA, any of those, that is a process that still exists with regard to any remaining trees, if you can't fit a path in, for example.
All right, thank you for staying to the whole meeting, or most of it. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So very much.
Thank
This
you.
will make my life so much better. I
Good.
really appreciate it.
Good. All right, thank you.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you, staff, for all of your hard work.
Thank you all for your thoughtful presentations too. All right. All right. So item 6 is the commissioner's report. And
I had a couple of comments regarding the commission real quick. In regards to a couple of things tonight, I think we saw with the Ridgeview Drive item on 5A with the basement under the accessory building, a couple of things that came to mind as we discussed that. Number one, that was an example of how somebody's coming back to us after we set a precedent with the job on Elena, right?
And the same doer, the same builder.
Right.
Or
So, we need to keep that in mind because our precedents carry weight and it kind of backs us into a corner.
Right.
Just using that as an example. Now, using that specific example of the underground garage and some of the things that came up tonight, and I'm just throwing this out there, I don't know what we need to consider, but and what came up before with the job on Elena was egress, fire suppression, and ventilation. And I just think we need to be ready. I don't know how we need to be ready, what steps we need to take to be ready to consider these items, because they're probably going to come up again.
Right.
And I question what role the Menlo Park Fire District needs to take in either collaborating with us on looking at those issues, or if those issues squarely fit into their purview. But at a minimum, I think it would be beneficial to have a conversation with them.
Through the chair, when instances like this come up, when it's a matter perhaps somewhat of a matter of zoning ordinance interpretation, the commission could certainly direct staff to study the particular topic a bit further and come back and provide you with answers to the questions that you just had, and that can be discussed at a future public hearing, and then next steps can also be directed from there accordingly if it's such decided upon.
Well, actually, we probably do need to look at the ordinance, because you started off by saying the intent of the ordinance is this. That's why we're bringing this forward. So if we had a more complete ordinance around this approach, it would be just, oh yes, we have the ordinance around the lift in a basement garage and this the requirements, and then it would never come to us. You know, because it'd be like check the ventilation, check the two exits, and then make sure the trees don't get destroyed by the digging. And then it would be check, and it would be less likely to come to us.
And the commission certainly has done that, at least in my tenure here in Atherton. I'm just thinking of some other topics unrelated, but as it related to sidewall height interpretation for main residences, also as it related to other basement light well related provisions. So I think it's certainly something that if the commission directs to staff, we can follow that same type of process.
I think we're directing you to do something.
That's what I'm hearing.
I'm leaving that to the chair.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing you.
Right on. The things you'll do for job security.
And then I just wanted to reiterate the precedent on the heritage tree removal. And going over, and I already shared this with Stephanie, but going over the items for tonight, the item at 28 Selby kept kind of coming back that we ruled against 2 months ago.
Right.
And there were reasons, and I understand each case is different. And these were very similar, although staff was still very clear on why they were different tonight, as outlined in their notes. But I just think we need to be careful, and again, to what you said about tonight's case on Euclid.
Right.
7 and 8, I think, did not meet the same guidelines as 5. And I just think these are items that we really need to consider seriously because of the precedents that we're setting. Right. And I understand your view on 6, totally get it. To me, it was a little bit closer to the pool, and also closer to where she wanted to put the path in.
Right.
I thought 7 and 8 were just in a world of their own.
Right.
But I'm getting off track. Just making sure that we need to be, as you said, consistent is so important. Otherwise, it's going to be a mess.
Well, this will be a good segue into. I would normally bring my comments up in the commissioners' reports, but because I did go to the town council meeting on our tree proposal, and it was a very interesting ride, and I've got some comments on it. I'll let Stephanie give you the overview, and then I'll come back to my commissioner's report when she gives you the overview. So why don't we start with the staff report?
So give you the overview of the council series of revisions to the heritage tree ordinance and the associated tree preservation guidelines, standards, and specifications document. So the Planning Commission recommendations were presented to the council. I think I'll start with the sort of biggest piece that was discussed that differed from the Planning Commission's recommendation. I noted this to the council in the staff report and making it clear to them that this additional change that was brought forth to the council was not part of the Planning Commission formal recommendation. Specifically what that was an opportunity to allow for an additional exception process for requests that wanted to deviate from the recommended tree protection zone standard of a 10 times the tree diameter that the commission recommended. Specifically, that was to consider, and then again, this is not, there was no detail presented with this amendment or proposed amendment. It was the idea to discuss it, and no criteria was established at this point. But in summary, what that was an additional exception process for a staff level exception to requests that wanted a lesser TPZ than the 10 TPZ as recommended by the commission, down to an 8 TPZ for development, buildings, structures, and a 6 TPZ for fences, walls, and driveways. So that point of an additional approach was directed to staff post Planning Commission series of all your study sessions, your public hearing, and your recommendation that you made to the council, primarily based off of further community input that had been received by town staff in many different departments. So that was, I think, the largest piece that differed from your commission recommendation that was presented to the council.
Which to me was everything.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so we come out, we say we were 12, and we came out with 10.
Right.
And we came out with, that would come here, and then we'd be able to monitor changes. And the recommendation was 8 or 6, depending on when, and we'll talk about it, and we'll negotiate it, and maybe we can come up with a resolution. So what I felt like we were back to where we are in terms of methodology, except that with a multiple that we had already determined wasn't going to be enough.
Right.
So,
and may I ask, were the additional community input, was that from residents? Was that from developers?
My understanding is it primarily came from, I would presume, additional members of the development community.
Are they
if there's anything you would like to add on those conversations or directions that you received, I wasn't necessarily privy to those conversations, so I don't have, unfortunately, more detail than what has been shared with me that I'm going to share with you tonight, and as I discussed with.
And so it sounds like if that's the case, that then as a town we're considering developers part of our community.
well, they are.
They are.
Right,
Yes.
yes.
But,
And I think one point, though, I just wanted to clarify is that the recommendation is not for, again, if it goes that way, it was just to further study that additional exception process, was not for a necessarily negotiation process as currently is being done. It would be under very specific established criteria. If the request for exception met criteria A, B, C, and D, then
that weren't specified.
that are not specified, that are not developed
Yeah.
yet, and it may be for specific criteria for species that may be different. I don't think we have flushed out how that's going to kind of come out to play yet, or evaluated appropriately.
Yeah, so I sent an email to Stephanie and Sally. I was there for the whole meeting. And I did not speak for 2 reasons. One, because they didn't ask for any input from me. and two, because we hadn't talked about me speaking before, and I didn't want to represent, be misunderstood. It was my own reaction to the meeting on behalf of the planning commission. So procedurally, I thought it was way out of line. If there's going to be that kind of a change from the year and a half that you guys spent on the tree subcommittee and all the discussion here, then that's going to happen. Then it should come back to the planning commission and say, hey, wait a minute, we had some more ideas, and here's some new thoughts we had based on more input. Instead, it went right to the town council, and they're looking at it going like, well, what about this, and what about that, and what about this, and how would that work? And so all of our early meetings where we would go like, what about this, and what about that, and what about this?
Right.
It was like a tape 3 years later. And then the setup of it going back to a new version of what it is today didn't sound any better than it is today to me. Only it's a lot better deal for developers that have six or eight time thing. Also, there were some things that they were brought up like, oh, I see you're adding redwood trees. We don't really like redwood trees, so redwood trees shouldn't be on the list. Only oak trees. And then there was an issue about the fire canopy and whether or not we have too many trees that create a fire hazard. And then there was a discussion about whether or not we really evaluated whether or not somebody could build on their property or not. And we don't have a situation where people don't build. Well, we spent a lot of time on that. That's why I did the maps with all the things. That wasn't brought up. So they walk away going, okay, so did they really look at whether or not somebody gets stuck with an unbuildable property? We don't want that. What about the small lots? We thought about that. And so not all the things that we spent 2 years going through went up in a 1 hour discussion.
What should have been done there, right?
What should have been done, it goes back to, so sometimes it's just what happens when somebody says, okay, there's a train that left the station, it's on the agenda, and they're going to review it. So, what I felt there wasn't enough distinction between what the method that the planning commission went through and the final outcome and what we anticipated it to be. But the proposed change to it was treated like just, oh, by the way, we added one more thing. Well, it wasn't one more thing. It was all the thing at the end of it.
Did they know we had gone over all this and made some decisions and addressed the problem?
Well, let's put it this way. It was sporadically told, but I don't think it was heard. But
They
because
didn't really care.
no, they cared. I think that actually, Sally, I don't think you represented us well at all.
Okay.
I would have done anything to help, but I thought it could only make it worse. And I really felt, three town council people felt like, okay, well, you dropped this in our lap. I didn't see any way to make it better in the meeting by me saying anything, and because it could only make it worse. And I talked to Stephanie afterwards about the idea of bringing it back here for discussion. It's already with the town council, so it's in their bailiwick now. So chances are they're going to go through some kind of version of what we went through.
Without coming back.
I put the request for that to come back to the commission, and because it's at the council level, the direction that I received was that they needed to make the request. Planning commission needs to make the request to the council to have it got brought back. You felt that the recommendation wasn't vetted properly through your prior discussions.
Yeah, so here's the question I have on that. So my intent always is to put staff in a position to be successful, right? Which was also part of one of the outcomes. It wasn't the goal, but it was one of the outcomes of doing this well. And that it would end up be easier to administer, clearer for everybody coming in, so they buy a property and go like, oh, I know how the rules work, and everybody goes, okay, I understand. And then when somebody got offline, we say, oh, remember the rule we told you, and we have rules like that. We have like how long do you have to build the property and all these other things. So the concern I have about formally asking to bring it back, is, I don't know that that helps staff. I don't know if the town council really wants to come back.
Well, I would think, I don't know, they probably don't want them to come back, and I think they have the, I don't know, I'm just assuming, I shouldn't make any assumptions.
Well,
How was it raised? By whom? By a single person on the council? By
What?
staff? The recommendation that consideration be given to lesser.
It was a slide that's how I had it. We had approved the 10 by and 7 points of how to administer it. And some of the things we talked about, like 1 month, monthly reports from the developers might seem too frequent. They said that, and it was like, oh, wow, what a great idea. Too bad I didn't think about that. So I'm sitting there going to the list of things that we had talked through and said, okay, well, it gets to be too onerous. We talked about quarterly, and then it was like, well, I couldn't get around all the things. So we had talked about every one of the things that brought up, but it sounded like it was the first time it had ever been discussed. We had the concept of what the mitigation of risk relative to the multiple wasn't brought up at all. So we can make it 2 by on the tree, and all you're doing is reducing or increasing the probability the tree won't survive. All right, you can make it 30 by and increase the probability that it would live a long, healthy life. Right. So all we were doing is trying to come up with a balance between buildability and giving the property owner the flexibility to build in the property and the health of the tree. That's the basic concept. That was never presented.
And using some established guidelines to try to come up with that.
Right, and then it was the idea that we looked at the Palo Alto guidelines, and theirs was 10, but they do a lot of negotiating about the 10, and the issue about what about the small properties and how would that work, and so I don't know the best way to fix it right now, but what I kind of felt was there's a change in the community about how protected trees are. And there's definitely a change in the new owners coming in. Definitely the new owner. I bet the new owner behind me, they just wanted to take out all the trees, including mine. So there's a number of things like that they're going on right now with new owners. They have a different perspective. When you buy a new house, you kind of expect it to be your canvas to work on, and that's what we're seeing. And anything that's not a heritage tree is gone. Heritage trees that doesn't look healthy is applied for being gone. And it seems like there's a little bit more of a sort of acceptability of that. So some of that could be direct feedback they're getting, and certainly that's developer feedback.
I'm still not clear on how this came up at the council meeting. Was it?
It was on the agenda. It was sort of a study session. There was no action required. And Stephanie kicked it off, and then Sally took the last report of that. Can you send us the deck that was presented?
The PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you'll see what was presented. Anyway, I wasn't happy, but I made that pretty clear. You got me in on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there needs to be a workable connection between us and the council, so they know what's going on, what's preceded the things they're gonna contemplate.
Right.
And I don't understand why they didn't realize it.
Well, I mean, after every study session that the commission had, and even prior to that, when we were at the ad hoc subcommittee level, I tasked myself in providing a summary of the outcomes of those discussions, and to be shared with all town staff and decision makers. So the information was shared. So they were provided that background throughout this lengthy process that you went through.
Very strange.
Yeah, so, I was connecting dots in my head, which were probably more of a novel than actually fact, but I'm sitting there going, okay, so we, as a commission, save a tree that eventually gets overturned. It was a marginal tree, and I didn't want to save that tree. I was definitely the swing vote on that one. And it ends up being a tree that they decide, yeah, why are they saving that tree? All right, so so that combined with, wow, we get this thing dropped in our lap for a new tree ordinance, and we're going like, well, we didn't wake up and say, hey, let's change the tree ordinance. We were directed to do that.
Right.
So
Wasn't there a similar kind of issue that came up on some of the trees for the town center that council decided to decide on?
yeah, yeah, there were a number of trees that we questioned whether there was a way to save them, and they decided that a couple of them they ended up saving, and others they decided to not.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if there's some link there. So,
That's another job I put together.
So hypothetically, if we requested for them to send it back to us for further discussion, and then would we then say, if we considered 6 or 8 feet width and came up with conditions, so would that be like another ad hoc group? Would that be another process where we come up with what, including Sally and her input professionally, to give us guidelines on conditions on when we can reduce that 10 feet? Is that what we would do? Hypothetically, what would we do with it if they sent it back to us?
I would say you would be evaluating this criteria that, as we mentioned before, is to be determined as draft in form, and deliberate on it and see if you feel it is appropriate, or you could add to it, you could take out of it, you could conduct another public hearing and receive community input. I guess in the form of a study session, please correct me if I'm not speaking properly in terms of process, but that's how I would envision it happening at the planning commission level versus taking it as an item for, I think you made mention of the ad hoc, and if I'm understanding you correctly, the ad hoc, presuming it would be the same 2 planning commissioners and 2 members of the tree committee, but
I don't think we would need the ad hoc. I think we bring it back here and look at the list of things that was discussed in the town council meeting, and say, okay, what specifically is the answer on small lots, and highlight it, which is that there's an answer there, but it wasn't highlighted. Do we take the redwood off, or do we come up with a case for why the redwood's on? Do we come up with a method for flexibility under certain criteria and layout criteria? I think of all the things that I was most concerned about is that without criteria, the concept of, it sounds like a good idea to have flexibility. Yeah, well, okay, then after the negotiation on a property for an exception to a format, the next time somebody doesn't agree with that, and it comes to the planning commission and says, well, wait a minute, look at these things that have been negotiated, and then how do you guys go against that? And we never had a chance to review it. So then all of a sudden, this underlying precedence is changing on us, and we don't even understand it.
Right.
Okay, so the other thing is I didn't want the town council to think that I am some kind of tree hugger guy that walking around nailing myself to a tree, making sure nobody gets it down. I am a person who's about consistency of the implementation of what we say we want to be as a town. All right, so let's put here's the rules. Here's how we enforce the rules. All right. Here's the flexibility around that enforcement. We like with the garage lifts. Okay, what was the intent? And then try to make the intent more and more clear all the time. Right? But make sure that we are in a situation where somebody doesn't say, well, wait a minute, those 6 trees were cut down in that property, and I've got 6 trees and they're redwoods, so why can't I cut them down? Do I have to? How big a walking path do I need to have? So it's one of those things where it gets us in a situation where the bulk of our work around here for the last 5 years has been trees. All right. So that in tennis courts on an 18% grade.
Mhm.
So, if we don't get the tree thing right, it doesn't work.
If I may, I did not have the privilege of being there last
Privilege
week.
is the word I was not going to use.
Yeah, I was actually on sick, so I missed the entire thing, unfortunately, because I think it would have been helpful for me to have that color to figure out exactly what was going on. But I think even if you were there, there is some resulting confusion on, is it policy direction? Is this just how the council feels? Is this not right? So what I would actually recommend is you might want to pause on it, give staff a chance to kind of figure out, take the temperature a little bit, figure out there are many different ways to get things back in front of council or to consider them, and there are different things. So maybe if we just give it a month or so, just to sort of let things shake out a little bit,
And
with
then
the
I'll
understanding that obviously it's something that was very frustrating for the commission.
So if it doesn't come back to us, would council modify it?
So council can do what council wants to
Okay,
do.
all right.
They can send something to you and ask for your opinion. They can disregard that opinion when
Right.
it comes back to them.
Right.
They can say don't consider it anymore. They really do set your agenda and what they do with it. And that's just how
But
it
they
works.
can modify that if
They can modify
Okay,
it.
all right.
They can, so that is really the last decision makers
Okay.
right there. Which is not to say that was their intent. So I think there's even still confusion
I get it.
on what was intended and how it was teed up, and I, normally it would be pretty typical to have the chair speak and say this is, serve as the liaison. That is a pretty common thing that happens. So I think there are a variety of things that could be explored with the very clear understanding that you're not happy with how the work that you did translated.
Well,
I think that ordinance needs to get around so that everybody sees
Well,
who thought what and why they did what they did, and maybe they shouldn't have, maybe you gotta remember we exist and so forth.
Well, here's the thing is that, keep in mind that, you're hearing this through my interpretation of the facts, so I encourage you.
Very skewed.
Yeah.
and the study sessions where there's no action taken, those are very, very difficult to walk away from and have sometimes a clear understanding, because even George will sit here and he'll kind of go, okay, so what I'm hearing is this, because you're getting a lot of different sort of idea dump really happening. And so I think maybe circling back with George, staff can do some things to kind of maybe get some color, some marching orders, or not. And the answer might be no, council's done with this, it's not a good time for it. And then there's sort of nothing you can do. Although in a community like this, with a lot of people who value the trees, those are the people that then come and speak at the next council meeting because they'd like this to be addressed.
Well, and the other thing too is.
Not you guys, but other people,
Well,
not the commission.
Well, the other thing too is what I was also, reminded of it from some of the other situations I've been in is that the developer community really only cares about what the town council decision is. They don't really care about what ours is. And to the degree that we can be helpful, that's nice, but it's not required. And so the real juice is there, and that was my belief as I was listening to this is, okay, they put their voice in after they saw what we did to basically get the changes that we didn't put in, which can make it a valid place to be at the town council. The other thing that I would say is it's a lot easier to make a decision about a rule if you don't understand the way that it's implemented. And so consequently, agreeing to the concept of something is not agreeing to the reality of it. And many of the things that we dealt with in our discussions were linking the reality to the concept to the execution. All right, and we talked about enforcement was the key thing. So then it was like, well, how about enforcement? Don't we just so there was a swirl on enforcement? It's like, okay. So I encourage you to have an evening where you're having trouble sleeping and watch the tape on this, because I'd be interested, one, to find out what your interpretation of it is, and because you may know individual players differently than I do. So take them there. Right now, there's nothing we can do except it's done. Yeah, you can do some things and tell us what we need to do or not.
And I based on our conversations and what is being discussed tonight, I don't think that the issue is done. I think I certainly would have follow-up conversations again, reiterate the concerns that have been expressed and march forward appropriately.
It should be helpful to them if we hash through a particular topic, and we have concluded certain opinions or facts. That would be helpful for them to know our decision, even if they didn't agree with it. And maybe they would agree with it.
Do you have anything else in your long staff report?
No, I think you touched upon the two other kind of key items that, again, with it being a study session, there wasn't direction we want to do this, but there was conversation about adding eucalyptus trees to the list of trees that don't require a permit for removal, based on their fire hazard capacities, as well as, sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a moment. The third one? And removing redwood trees as a protected tree, in the buildable area.
Right. Okay. But nobody's touching palm trees. All right, which have really good roots for around pools, by the way. All right, anything else that we need to cover?
Yeah, appreciate the fact that you were there and
Yes,
soaked
thank
it
you.
all in and synthesized it and I'm sure condensed it to bite-sized, understandable pieces for us.
Yeah, I hope so. All right.
Thank you.
Need a motion?
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Move second. We're adjourned.